All right, so the other topic we need to cover to wrap up heredity is sex-linked traits. So some basics first. So keep in mind every individual has two sex chromosomes. Sex chromosomes are the chromosomes that determine the gender of an individual. In humans, XX denotes a female and XY would be a male. These chromosomes, however, also carry other genes, and that's why we'll talk about them here, because they're not just determining gender characteristics, but also there are other genes that tag along that could affect other parts of an individual. So keep in mind during meiosis, when everything splits into 4 cells to make those sex gamete cells, an egg is always going to get an X chromosome from the mom. Females are XX, so every egg is going to get an X because that's all a female has to pass on. A sperm, however, could either get an X or a Y, and it's a 50-50 shot because males have an X and they have a Y, and each sperm is only going to get one or the other. So in reality, when you think about it, you always get an X from mom, you either get an X or a Y from dad. So the male sperm determines the sex of the child. If the sperm brings an X to the egg, XX, it's going to be a female. If it's a Y, XY, it's going to be a male. So there are some traits, like I said, that are not necessarily connected to gender that do travel on the X and Y chromosome. We're going to focus on the X chromosome for all our examples to not make it too complicated. But some of these traits might include red-green color blindness, hemophilia, muscular dystrophy, Fragile X syndrome. Some of the high blood pressure genes travel on the X chromosome. Baldness travels on the X chromosome, and many more. So when we use alleles solving sex-linked traits, we're going to write them a little bit funky. So when you are solving for sex-linked traits, you're going to always include the X and the Y because there's going to be different outcomes for males and females. You're going to use a subscript to denote the trait of interest. So instead of just using letters for our alleles, we're going to use an X or a Y and a letter with the dominant and recessive rules still to denote the genotype. So let's look at an example. Color blindness is a common sex-linked recessive trait. If you look at the top here, there's 3 different options essentially that you could inherit. Again, color blindness is recessive. So you could have an X with a capital B. This is an X chromosome with a normal dominant allele. That means it doesn't have the color blindness trait. You could have an X with a lowercase b. This is an X chromosome with the recessive color blindness allele. Here's where it gets a little funky with sex-linked traits. The Y carries completely different genes than the X. So we're not going to attach a little letter to the Y because it wouldn't carry that same gene, whether it is the dominant or the recessive version. So Y is not going to get a letter. And again, to keep it simple, I'm going to do all of our sex-linked traits based on X-linked traits. So we're not going to mess around with the Y at all, other than using that to determine gender. So for females, we have some options. Females could be homozygous dominant. This is a completely normal female. She inherited 2 of the dominant normal alleles. The next option here, this is a heterozygous female. Again, female because it's XX, but they have a dominant normal allele and they have a recessive colorblind allele. But because it's recessive, it stays hidden, but you can call this female a carrier. So this is a female who is not colorblind, but she could pass it on to her son or daughter. The last one here is a female who is colorblind. She has 2 of the recessive alleles. That means she got a recessive allele from her father and a recessive allele from her mother. So both parents were able to pass on that recessive allele. For males, there's only 2 options. Because we don't mess around with the Y at all, because that has totally different genes, if you're a male, you either inherit the dominant normal gene and you're not colorblind, or you inherit